I was really bashful around strangers. I simply couldn't communicate with them. Additionally, I discovered that drinking helped me relax. I got really gregarious and the barriers fell away. That's what I began. And, well, it took me a while to move on from it. I receive a lot of letters from folks who claim that suddenly they didn't feel embarrassed to acknowledge that they had a drinking issue and they received assistance. I'm quite proud of it, then was able to assist others. In the past 3 years, Dyke van Dyke has nearly died 3 times. 10 years, once in a car that was on fire. On the ground they used to crawl during wildfires, but every time something amazing occurred. He is married to a woman at the age of 99, his granddaughter, but yet too young. He continues to exercise more than the majority of 30. Additionally, he recently disclosed his covert strategy for reaching 100 at nearly 100 years old. What he's doing is so stunning that even his closest friends find it hard to believe. The birth date of Dyke van Dyke was December 13, 1925 in West Plains, Missouri, a small town. His father, Lauren, was a door-to-door salesperson, and his mother, Hazel, was a stenographer. Back then, they had very little. Lauren's weekly income was roughly $26, which would boot $400 today. Less than 5,000 individuals lived in the town, and things were difficult. But Dyke was indelibly changed by something about his small-town existence. It provided him with a straightforward charm and unwavering work ethic that persisted even after he eventually became one of the most well-known figures in Hollywood. The family later relocated to Danville, Illinois. Things became fascinating at that point. In the late 1930s, while attending high school, Dyke found himself surrounded by future celebrities in the early 1940s. O'Connor Donald, who went to school with him and later danced in Singing in the Rain. Bobby Short did the same, who would rise to fame in New York as a vocalist. Additionally, Gene Hackman's cousin was one of his closest pals. In a classroom, at least 3 would become national celebrities out of a school body of little under 200. Such a probability is quite uncommon. However, it gave Dyke the impression that he might perhaps accomplish something significant. Prior to taking the stage, Dyke believed that he would become a minister. They never missed Sunday church thanks to his mother. When he was 15, he even delivered a sermon. He enjoyed the thought of improving people's moods. Once he said he aspired to make others happy the way his pastor did each week. However, then came school productions. Everything changed when he began to act. A drama instructor inspired him to perform, and his desire to become a preacher gradually dwindled, that the world nearly missed his singing and dancing on screen. Something else almost prevented him from performing. Doctors informed him at the age of 16 that he had a murmur in the heart. That meant no football, no running, and no sports whatsoever. It was devastating information. However, he was unable to participate in athletics, so he enrolled in acting class. He landed his first part. That tumble, and a sudden realization struck. He got the impression from the applause that he'd never forget. The illness that initially seemed to be a curse ended up being therapy. He discovered the stage. In 1944, just 2 years later, Dyke made a decision that astounded everyone. He attempted to enlist in the military during World War II after dropping out of high school. However, at just 130 pounds and 6 won, hadn't weighed enough to qualify. He made 3 unsuccessful attempts. The 141 pounds was the minimum. He thus continued to eat bananas until he eventually passed away. 4th attempt. He never saw combat even then. Rather, he amused soldiers. At home. He didn't care about it. All he wanted to do was assist, and he had no intention of giving up. Dyke's dream after being admitted was to fly aircraft. However, that dream was short-lived due to an allergy. He found combat impossible, and his performance in drills was poor. He became a radio announcer as a result. The method by which he was hired was almost absurd. At a base in Sherman, Texas, while using the restroom, he was given a piece of paper by the officer, who instructed him to read it. His audition was that, in an instant, he became the voice of the flight time program. That bathroom moment was as odd as that was the beginning of a career that would reach millions of people. Dyke didn't end there. Radio. He transitioned into the entertainment division of the military, constructing sets and participating in stage productions. He sprinted. Comedy shows, music, and even jokes were broadcast over the mess's loudspeakers. Hall. Although these brief, tumultuous performances lacked glamour, they taught him how to remain confident and think quickly. They also showed him how to establish a connection with the crowd, wherever he might be. After several years, those same abilities would carry him through movies and television. Following the conclusion of the war in 1946, Dyke went back home. At the age of 21, he accepted a position spinning records on W-Dan, his local radio program. He entertained families with music, jokes, and competitions throughout the entire town. It provided him with a platform, but it wasn't a major position. Individuals become familiar with his voice. He was not yet famous, but he was on the verge of becoming so. Failure followed. Rather than immediately entering the entertainment industry, Dyke attempted to establish a Danville advertising firm. It was short-lived. In a year, the company failed. He suffered a financial loss. He became insecure. It might have come to an end. Everything, however, That defeat marked a sea change. Desperate, he joined forces with a pal, Phil. A comedy duet will be formed by Eriksson. That single choice put him on the course to amusement. They performed the act of Eric and Van the Merry Mutes together. Wick relied entirely on comedy and mime music, with no spoken words. As everyone, they lip-synced to old albums, pursued punchlines, and used body language. Take the laughs. They began at nightclubs on the West Coast and continued traveling more than 5 years. That amounts to over 2,000 nights of non-stop performance, non-stop journeying and continuous practice. They even appeared on the first television show. In mime acts were uncommon in Atlanta. According to Van DJK, this period of time sharpened everything. His endurance, timing, and ease with a live audience even before his name was known. The 12th of February 1948, something on live radio. Something strange occurred. Dick Van DJK and Marjorie Willett, his girlfriend, wedded in front of 15 million people. They were impoverished, and the National Bride and Groom radio program promised to cover their honeymoon and wedding expenses if they agreed to exchange vows in person. Thus they did. To a room full of strangers, a preacher, and microphones made it official. It was an early look at the potential blending of entertainment and reality on television. The union delivered them for children and lasted for 36 years. Long before reality television, Van DJK and Willett experienced one of the first and most well-publicized instances of turning wedding drama into a business. Van DJK ended up working for WDSU in New Orleans in the early 1950s. The first television station in the city was TV Channel 6. He had a modest beginning. He performed comic sketches, hosted music events, and made announcements. Height occupied airtime during the midday news broadcast on the channel. It was a trailblazing station. It thereafter became the first to broadcast in color in the far south, and Van DJK was in the midst of everything, experimenting with fresh content each week. It was a challenging job, but he picked it up quickly. Audiences in New Orleans anticipated swift chuckles and vibrant vitality, and Van DJK provided them with both. In retrospect, that work taught him strategies for surviving live TV, him for the next step. Next, 1954 arrived, and Van DJK's debut on a talent program on national television, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. ABC broadcast it, and it helped up-and-coming artists get their begging. Viewers and producers were captivated with Van Dyke's mime act, which was supported by comedy. Similar. He started appearing as a guest on national variety shows such as the Filthy Pat Boone Chevy Dealership and Silver Show. It wasn't long before it showed producers that he was capable of more than simply mime. 5 years from now, he would depart from Broadway star to guest performer. Such an ascent was unusual. The majority of comedians tried to get there for 10 years. Van Dyke gave it a quick and simple, yet years of quiet practice and menial work went into it. In 1956, everything changed when a friend from Van Dyke's Army days stepped in with an offer. Now, that friend was ANSI-B's executive. It was successful when he suggested Van Dyke to the network. Van Dyke signed a 7-year deal. It wasn't common. Long-term networks did not distribute deals to comedians who haven't achieved national recognition. Van Dyke, however, possessed something distinct. He quickly began co-hosting the morning program on CBS. Walter co-hosted the news segment with him. Cronate. The opportunity lasted longer than the show. That agreement was the first actual wager that CBS placed on Van DJK, and it was successful. At the end of 1959, Van Dyke reached Broadway. The Girls Against the Boys, his debut performance, debuted in November and ended 2 weeks later. After just 16 shows, there was nothing off-screen. Romance, only complete attention to detail in every scenario. Later they made a joke about, though it was a horrible waste, the on-screen magic was preserved by not having an affair. Undamaged. Critics and the public took note. The Emmy was given to Dick Van Dyke for exceptional principal performer in a comedy series for 3 consecutive years, 1964-1965, as well as 1966. The program itself won in the same years. 4 exceptional comedic shows. This was unusual. Sitcoms had difficult rivalry, but Van Dyke's performance was particularly noteworthy. He was affable, quick, and humorous without ever going overboard. The program gained traction. It continued to win, and it continued to gain reputation. With only 158 episodes in under 5 years, the program won 15 Emmys. Overall, it garnered 24 nominations and 27 victories across major genres. These applied to acting, writing, and the entire series, winning only at the time 1 Emmy was a huge deal. This show was so successful that it broke anticipations. It was still regarded as one of the greatest presentations ever produced by both years. Later, the Writer Guild and TV Guide, even after the June premiere of the last episode, the show continued. In 1966, new generations learned and reruns continued to play Laura, Petrie, and Rob. It was among the first sitcoms to maintain their popularity through the use of syndication till the 2000s. Even after starring in Diagnosis Murder and Mary Poppins, Van Dyke's performance had such an impact that people initially perceived him as Rob Petrie. The actors, The script and the harmony between storylines about work and home helped establish it as a template for sitcoms in the future. It also had a passionate and obvious conclusion that increased the story's credibility and contributed to securing its heritage. Van J.K. became well known thanks to the Dick Van D.J.K. Show, although his first significant in 1963, the film Bye Bye Birdie was released. He had already performed the part on Broadway and received a Tony Award, but the movie elevated it to a much higher level. Viewers. Inspired by the era, it blended rock and roll with a light-hearted look at celebrity. Elvis Presley enlisted militarily in the roles of Albert Peterson and Van J.K. Anne Margaret, a rising star, appeared on the same screen as him. She even re-asked a nomination for a Golden Globe. Specifically, the song Put on a Happy Face turned into one of Van Dyke's defining moments. His talent was even more than people's, according to critics. Shown on television, the film demonstrated that he was also capable of bringing musicals to the big screen. Mary Poppins followed in 1964. Van J.K. performed in 2 different roles. Many people were unaware that he also played the old bank, but everyone remembers him as Bert, the happy chimney sweeper. Manager, senior to Mr. Dorr. That part nearly didn't come to pass. Walt Disney wasn't confident in the concept. Van D.J.K. offered to spend $4,000 of his personal funds exclusively for the opportunity. He was almost unrecognizable under thick makeup. He was really mentioned in the credits as Navskid Keed, which is an anagram of his own name. The trick was successful. He was nominated for a Golden Globe and joined off a beloved family movie ever produced. Many years later, he came back in second installment in the role of Mr. Dorr Jr. Additionally, the Mary Poppins soundtrack became an enormous success. It sold more than 2.3 million copies in 1964 alone. In 1968, it had surpassed 6 million. It topped the Billboard album chart for 14 weeks. That was unusual, particularly for a kid-friendly music. It took home it won a Grammy for Best Children's, Concord, and became a staple in families' daily lives everywhere. Van D.J.K. performed throughout a number of memorable songs such as Supercalifragilistic and Chim Chim Cherry Expialidocious. Walt Disney personally came to love the song Feed the Birds. He always reportedly requested to have it played in his office once a week. The Oxford Dictionary even acknowledged the impact. Expanded its list of words to include supercalifragilistic. In Van D.J.K. played the lead in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang in 1968. It was inspired by Ian's book The Same. Fleming, who made James Bond, Albert R. produced the movie. Also well known for the Bond series is Broccoli, playing Caractacus Potts Van J. Unmarried parent and inventor who builds a fantastic flying vehicle. The tunes of the film's excitement came from its script, which was penned by the same team that wrote Mary Poppins. The plot was carried by Dyke's portrayal of a fun inventor and devoted parent. Sally Ann was also part of the cast. Gert Frobe, who had portrayed the antagonist Goldfinger in a Bond movie, and House the title song received an Oscar nomination, and the film was a box office success. It became a family favorite very soon. In 1969, Van D.J.K. made the decision to display an alternative aspect of himself. He portrayed Billy in the Carl Reiner-directed comic. A silent movie star named Bright's life takes a turn for the worst. It wasn't a light film or melodic, it was poignant and serious. Bright achieved success, but is overcome by addiction and arrogance. The movie was somewhat based on actual legendary silent film figures such as Buster Keaton. When it was released, Hollywood was moving toward more realistic tales, although the comic wasn't very successful at the time. Critics later commended it for its candid portrayal of celebrity, as well as failure. Additionally, it demonstrated that Van D.J.K. was equally capable of handling dramatic roles. As humor. In the early 1970s, Dick Van D.J.K. experienced one of the most difficult times in his life. His struggle with booze over 7 years. Addiction grew worse. He was so shattered by 1972 that he checked himself into a 3-week rehabilitation facility. I felt suicidal, he claimed, that he had begun drinking to calm himself in social settings. But it evolved into something much more hazardous. He likened the hold of heroin to that of alcohol. While in recovery, he experienced excruciating withdrawal in the mental health unit, and came to terms with the fact that he was actually hooked. That instant transformed him. It took a few slips before something eventually clicked. He once felt so sickened by the idea of drinking that he totally forfeited the desire. Since then, he hasn't consumed any alcohol. He is currently in his late 90s and credits the 2 main factors contributing to his long life were his sobriety and his physical fitness. However, his marriage was disintegrating as he battled addiction. He and after more than 20 years of marriage, his wife Margie and he became more distant. Things worsened when he began having an affair with his agent's employee Michelle Triola in 1976. He acknowledged that the guilt tore him apart and that the affair made matters worse. He was having trouble, and so was Margie. She had a medication, and he had alcohol. Pills. Shortly after him, she checked herself into the same hospital. However, the divorce did not occur immediately after their separation. Later, he stated that he had to mature and become more truthful as a result of the suffering and shame of that era. Despite everything, He and Margie maintained communication and concentrated on raising their 4 kids together. Their union, which began in 1948 and came to a formal end in 1984, that was 36 years later for Van. The divorce was a significant turning point. DJK, it enabled him to start over, focus on maintaining sobriety and accept a new era of his life. In 2008, Margie died of pancreatic cancer. Her passing affected him deeply, despite the years they had spent apart. He said he seemed to have lost a piece of himself. In the meanwhile, his connection with Michelle Triola lived for more than 30 years. They moved in together, approximately 1976, and remained dedicated until her passing in 2009. Although Michelle had previously made news for her legal battle with actor Lee Marvin, Van DJK saw her as someone who offered him comprehension throughout his most difficult years. Although they never married, he frequently said that she made him feel. He remained by her side, singing while she passed away from lung cancer. To her in her last hours. Although the manner in which their relationship began was despite the controversy, it turned out to be one of the most significant aspects of his life. Despite all of these personal hardships, Van DJK made a significant TV comeback in an unexpected manner. He assumed a function in 1993 that was significantly different from his typical humorous segments. In the crime series Diagnosis, Murder, he played Dr. Mark Sloan, a blend of family drama and mystery. Barry, his real-life son, portrayed him on screen. But after only 2 seasons, the show was on the verge of cancellation, but it recovered and gained popularity among fans. In the end, it lasted 8 seasons with 178 episodes in addition to 2 films. It even outlasted his well-known sitcom from the 1960s. The performance sustained his career and opened up a whole new audience for him. However, just when things appeared to be calm, Van DJK encountered an odd health issue that continued for many years. He began to hear a thumping sound in his head in the early 2000s. Every time he attempted to lie down, it grew worse and felt more like a heartbeat. He went through every test and saw numerous doctors, but nobody was able to provide an explanation. The issue got so terrible in 2013 that he had to call off a big event in New York since he was too worn out to go. When he eventually brought up the issue online, someone speculated that it might be his dental implants, which ultimately proved to be the reason. After he resolved the problem, the sound subsided.